All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Q4 book club. This is our simultaneously the last book club of 2024 and the first book club of 2025. Um, for our fourth quarter of the year, we always do like a self-help or a creative process kind of book. Um, and since it is actually February 2nd, um, I actually have news on what our future picks are going to be for both our monthly clubs, which are movie and listening club, as well as our next book club pick. So, um, for anybody that doesn't know, these are the three multimedia clubs that we have at Dragonfly Arts. We're a Facebook group that has like a lot of creatives on it. We have a lot of calls. Um, I say Facebook group, really, we just use Facebook to interact with one another. We're more than that. We also do like in-person meetups if you're in the Los Angeles area. And a lot of what we do is online in various places. Um, but for these multimedia clubs, we have monthly movie club. This month for February, we're watching AI artificial intelligence. We have a monthly listening club. We're listening to Aurora, and I'll have to apologize. I don't remember the title. It's a longer title. It's like All My Demons Greeting Me as a Friend. I think that might be right. Um, and then our quarterly book club, which we do every quarter for our first quarter of the year, which runs from February until April. We read a more modern, anything published after the year 2000, but fiction. And I put a poll up, and it was pretty much unanimous that we were going to read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's a sci-fi book. I do not know why we always pick sci-fi books. We are huge fans of sci-fi in this group. If you like what we do and you'd like to support us, we also have a Patreon where you can help support our endeavors for as little as $2 a month. Everything we offer is currently free to our members, so you can just join the Facebook group without doing anything on Patreon. We don't have any perks on there at the moment, but we appreciate any help that you would like to give us so that we could continue making these clubs and providing all the other services to creatives that we provide. Whether you're watching this now or in the future, because we do have these replays up, feel free to comment. I love seeing the comments. I love having discussions about this media. And without further ado, let's talk about Bird by Bird, which is kind of an interesting choice. I also did this one based on a poll. I like to do our books based on polls because, everybody in our group has different creative fields, so I want to make sure we're not like favoring one thing over the other. I myself am a photographer, but so we ended up picking a book about writing, which I do some writing. I don't consider myself a writer. So it's interesting to read books this one was literally about Anne Lamott and her writing process, or really the lessons that she teaches her writing students. Not all of them are writing specific.
Yes. So in that vein, I think it's very translatable to other creative fields.
I mean, it's called Some Instructions on Writing and Life. So I'm going to go ahead and get into it. Both of you guys do writing, so I'm curious how much you got from it. Did you enjoy the book?
Yeah, I mostly listen to it as an audiobook, which is my MO these days. I do a lot of driving, so it's easy when I'm in the car. And I did enjoy it. I really like her wry sense of humor. But listening to it made me wish that I had chosen to read it instead, because I don't like her. She narrates it herself. And I didn't think her delivery was great. But she's a writer, not a voice actress. So
I usually like it when books are read by the author because like you get like their tone for it. I could see that working well for her because she does have like a very dark sense of humor, self-deprecating.
Yes.
How about you, Tim? Did you enjoy the book?
I did. I've had this book for a long time, and the first time I tried to read it, I was reading more technical craft type books, like a lot of John Gardner, and I wasn't. And I read, I think, the first chapter or two, and it just wasn't what I needed at the time. So, so this is my first time reading, all the way through, and I was much more open to. Um, No, not open to. I was just more prepared to take in the ideas that she had uh, about, because I'm in that place now where I have to think less about craft and I have to think more about motivation, um, and this really helps with that. I don't think she didn't necessarily she hasn't she doesn't say anything that I haven't heard before, but she says it in her very own unique style that she has, her unique voice. So it was interesting in that way, and I probably got more. Um, I got stuff out of it that I didn't necessarily get out of other writers who presented similar ideas.
Yeah, this is not a technical like writing book. This reads more like an autobiography than anything.
Yeah, it's definitely a memoir, which is what Anne Lamott does really well. Is she does a lot of like memoir nonfiction kind of stuff. So it's very much in that vein. I think this is her most popular book. I haven't read any of her other stuff. Um, I probably will not be exploring a lot of it, if I'm being completely honest. Um,
Why?
I'm not a fan of her writing style. It got very tiresome for me after like the first few chapters.
Mhm.
Um,
She's very,
Self-deprecation will only get you so far and before it becomes a little bit grating.
yeah, it's very like, you know, wry, self-deprecating, and also kind of all over the place. Um, like she very often switches between like themes and then goes back and forth between like different subjects that she's talking about. So I can see that, it's not everyone's style.
When I initially, because I always post whatever book I just finished reading, I was like, there are a lot of very, very interesting tidbits of information in this. Not they aren't necessarily new, but I think that one of the benefits of like a lot of self-help or instructional books along this line is it can remind you of things that you have heard before, but you've just ignored. Um, and I like a lot of those things. I really like the, 1 inch picture frame um, kind of idea. And she has a lot of great quotes in this from other authors, which I interestingly highlighted a lot of those quotes that she took from other authors, which I think is kind of funny looking back at like the things that I highlighted in the books. Um,
Yeah,
I do not remember where I was going with this sentence.
I probably will read this again at some point just as a book instead of listening to it, because there are a lot of like little interesting tidbits of wisdom that I would like to like bookmark and have highlighted. Um, but yeah, uh, I found it very interesting in that she's kind of mostly throughout the book she's talking about the things that she teaches her students about writing, and a lot of it is basically, don't expect to make money and just do it. Do it for the joy of doing it because you love it and because you want to, which I think is very applicable to everything else.
She very much voices something that I constantly have to remind myself of, which is the first draft is never going to be perfect or good. There's a lot of reworking that has to go on through that first one, but I found that she never quite got past that. So she spends a lot of the book saying it's okay for everything to just be terrible. And then she just keeps talking about how terrible it is. Like it never quite gets to the point where it's actually like a decent piece of work.
Well, and that's something that we have talked about in the Dragonfly calls before, is when is the work done? And I think that it's letting go of perfectionism and, not expecting it to be good. it doesn't mean that someone out there isn't going to think that it is. But as the artist, you're always going to criticize it more than anyone else. So at a certain point, you have to realize it's not going to be good enough to stand up to your standards. So you have to just call it done and let it go.
I think she said in it that it's trying to put an octopus to bed.
Yes.
So no matter how many tentacles that you put in, there will always be one that just pops out again.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think was the biggest takeaway for you from the book?
For me, I found it helpful because, in my writing, I've gotten into a bad habit of trying to perfect the one thing that I'm working on. And that's something that she talks again, like, don't try to do that. Like, if you're going to write, just write whatever comes to mind, write out a memory, write out, and describe it in detail, and like just very, small vignettes of things, and call that your writing for the day. And maybe you'll use it at some point or maybe not, but at least you wrote it. And I found that to be very helpful advice, because that's not been my approach.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I struggled with for a long time, and maybe I still do a little bit. And this is one of those ideas that I've had other writing books present this solution, but again, they didn't present it in quite this way. And I think the thing about the book as a whole, I think maybe what she's trying to drill into the reader's head is not to overthink and not to sweat the small stuff and just get it done. When I was younger and I was writing, when I first started writing, I would do complete stream of consciousness and go straight through and then go back through. But then as I started getting older, I started being a perfectionist, and I started, I'll work over a sentence until it's got the right syntactical rhythm that I want to hear. And then I'll do a paragraph the same way. And God, down that road lies madness. Down that road, madness lies. And so I think I've just finally accepted the fact that I need to plow through as much as I can. I probably labor over chapters or scenes more rather than laboring over sentence and paragraphs, trying to set up the scene just right in a way that the reader might not have read a similar scene before, me being the reader. Yeah, I think that this is one of those things that just, she hammered away at something that I already knew, but presented it in a way that gave me a more positive feeling about it. I think I came away being more relaxed about the idea of not doing that, laboring over a sentence or a paragraph instead of just moving forward and get everything, done.
I think that a lot of it is when you do start thinking about thinking it over sentence by sentence, it starts to gain a lot of potential that can't be realized. So getting it down.
Yeah, and it just takes so much longer. Like, I have a bad habit of doing that, and going back and working on an entire paragraph for, my entire writing session. That if you want to get a work done, and that was what was so challenging about finishing my novel before I did, was not stressing on the little bits and just focus on getting the whole thing out on paper.
Something else. No, you go, Tim.
I was going to say it's and I know we've talked about this a lot in the past, is what I discovered for me was that I was using that to, not all the time, but I was often using that to procrastinate. I didn't want to sit down and think about what the next scene had to be and how to, because writing has always been torture for me. It's I love the end product, but the work to get to the end product, I just fucking hate. And
Yeah, I think I was using it because I didn't know what the next scene was going to be, or I knew what it was and I knew it was going to be hard and I didn't want to do the work. And so I think oftentimes, at least 50% of the time, laboring over a sentence or a paragraph was a way to avoid going on to the next scene.
Mm. Yeah, I think another bit of advice that I pulled from this book was having a process that works for you and not like expecting it to look a certain way. Like, I don't know. I remember her talking about like the writing process and how every writer has a different one. And it doesn't have to be you get up at 8 a.m. and you write for an hour every single day. Like it can look like whatever's going to work for you. But to have like that process when you're going in and not just expect words to magically fall out.
She places a lot of emphasis on creating an environment where the words can just fall out as opposed to expecting them to just happen at some point. So
Right.
even though it may not look like get up and then start writing at 8, it could look like that, but it's still get up and start writing, or rather sit down and start writing at the same time every day in the same spot. So, and I think I can attest to that because I accidentally trained myself to want to write when I was working on a project, and I would always sit at the same point in my couch, which isn't a spot that I normally sit in. I was sitting like that so that I wouldn't see the TV as my husband was playing a video game. But it turned into, if I sat down on the couch in that way, I felt like I should be writing. And so I would just start writing, or I would start generating ideas that had to do with this writing project. So it absolutely works. It's a weird mental training thing that I relate to a lot of just creating your own space. And this is something that I think a lot of writers definitely talk about.
Yeah. And it was in Atomic Habits too, when we read that.
Yes.
It was about like making the habit around a specific circumstance of events that makes, that thing, what happens in that place at that time. So that then that becomes just, mindless and is just how it goes. And that's how a habit forms. But yeah, I appreciated her talking about like, just doing the work and not expecting it to look any certain way.
There was something that she said also that is something that I started doing it while I was working on the writing program for my degree. I realized that I often try to force my plot onto my characters and onto the writing. I try to make them go where I want them to go, and it writes myself into a corner. And she talked about this, about opening up and letting the characters go the way they want to go. And that was something that I discovered really helped me get past certain kinds of blockages where I was just having a hard time getting the story where I pre-planned it to go. And if I just let the characters do what they want to do, the story progresses, kind of the way it should. I think I referred to this as telling the story organically. Let the story and the characters tell you where it wants to go. Don't try to make it go to where you want it to go. So it's nice to see another writer acknowledge that idea.
She actually talks a lot about a book that she was writing that had a plot that didn't go anywhere, but everybody really liked the characters, and she kept having to rework it so that the characters actually did something. Which is pretty funny.
I remember that she had a few meetings with her editor, and the characters weren't like their actions weren't lining up with the plot she was trying to give them, or something So, I think it's about like knowing your characters, and as a fleshed out person, as opposed to like, oh, this is just a plot device. No, this is supposed to be a living, breathing person, and their story has to reflect how they would behave.
One thing that's I don't think she addressed it, but one of the things that I do in that direction is I will put two of my characters in a room and have them talk. It can even be the protagonist and the antagonist, or it could be the antagonist and a friend. It could be anybody who I'm trying to figure out what their character is, and I just write dialogue between those two characters that transcribe that conversation, and that helps me get close to those characters and know what is true and honest for them in terms of motivations and how they act.
Yeah, I also don't think I will be reading any of her other works. She's a little religious for me, but I enjoyed this one. So
Interesting.
I know that I understand that she's religious. I always thought I felt when I was reading it that she was very she was not religious. She was not a
this book was not overly religious.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, this one had it. But
she mentions God.
Yeah, that's fine. People have different beliefs, but like I looked up some of her other works, and it is a lot about like her relationship with God. She talks about that a lot, and I just that's not a subject matter that I'm interested in.
Right. Just I guess I never felt like she was saying that my religion is, I think this way, and so you should think this way.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No. I understand that you're not. I totally understand, and I'm not saying that you are. I'm just I would be uncomfortable with it if it was this is how we do it in my religion, and this is how you might try to do it. Where it felt
if it was preachy.
Yeah, she's never preachy. She just in an offhand way will say, she'll mention something religious or something that she learned from religion, and in the next sentence she'll say, but however you can get there, it doesn't have to be a religion. Not in so many words that she says that, but that's the implication of how she says it. I haven't read any of her other work, so I can't.
I just briefly looked them up, and it seems like they are much more along the the religious aspect than this book is. She mentioned at one point that I was trying to find what her most popular book was before this, and I couldn't find any information. But because she mentions like the one that sold the most copies, there's like a whole section toward the end of the book where she talks about it, and I was like, what book is she referring to? And I couldn't find it.
She doesn't mention any of her books by name in this. She just kind of talks about them. So this is her most popular. Her nonfiction tends to be more popular than her fiction works.
Yeah, I was just curious which book she was talking about, because obviously it wasn't this one at the time she was writing it.
I loved that little that short essay that she wrote about her friend's infant that passed away, and taking her boy, she and her boy going and spending time with the parents and the baby, both before the baby died and after the baby died, and it was so moving, and I think she might mention something religious like once, but for the most part it's a very sectarian piece, and I thought it was gorgeous.
Yeah, I thought that was very poignant as well. I enjoyed that part.
Sorry, I'm going through her
bibliography.
Kind of, yeah. I don't know much about any of her other work. I will say that her nonfiction is much more popular. Um, a lot of them are like journal entries, and I did get that feeling while writing this of like, she talks about writing almost events as if they're letters, as like a form of like note keeping. And for her, since she does like nonfiction and essays, it's material for her to use later on. And I always really wanted to start that kind of journaling, and it just does not work for me. And I
Yeah.
think it's very unfortunate. Maybe I'll go to this side. I'm trying not to get the sunlight in my eyes, but this looks better than me just like awkwardly being off to the side. Um, it's almost like a very similar writing style to like David Sedaris, who I really like his work, and it's all journal entries, and everything he does is nonfiction based on his life. He's also very humorous, very somehow same vibe, but very, very different. um, I like him a lot more. But this kind of form of writing where it's observational journal entries and the way that she keeps notes on things, I find is very interesting, where she talks
Yeah.
about having note cards.
Yeah,
And
her
even
whole like cataloging system.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Even looking at her bibliography, I feel like I can see like the path that her life took just based on like the titles of them. Like you can watch that as like and it's interesting to do like a mix of kind of fiction and nonfiction. I think when I looked her up, she kind of transitioned mostly into nonfiction after this book. Um, yeah, she writes a lot more nonfiction than fiction.
Yeah, I don't know whether you, the two of you got this out of it, but I was thinking about the way she was writing, and we kind of expect the books that are finally published by whoever that we don't see the editing. It does all feel like stream of consciousness, but this really felt like it was written stream of consciousness to me, like I was reading a first draft. And I don't mean that it has the problem qualities that a first draft has. It just, the way it's written, it almost feels like she didn't have a plan for the chapter and she just spit it out. And what we are reading is for all intents and purposes what she spit out when she first wrote it.
It definitely does have that vibe, but like it moves from place to place. We revisit things just like throughout chapters as if the story is just continuing.
Right, which probably contributes to that feeling that I got. And it probably also contributed the fact that I thought the middle of the book from part 2 through the first half of part 3 kind of dragged for me. It really was a slog for me to get through part 2 and the first half of part 3. I don't know. Did you guys feel that at any point?
I felt like it started to get a little bit repetitive. I kind of put it down for a while and then had to rush to finish it. So I didn't have the slog feeling just because of like the time frame of which I was reading it in kind of messes with that a lot. So about halfway through, it started to feel a little bit repetitive, like I was hearing the same information and having it drilled into my head. I liked the first half of this book a lot more than the second half.
Mm-hmm.
And it does. I mean, a lot of these notes are things that she teaches her students, and it almost feels like we are her students that she's saying all this to. Cats are being fed.
Yeah. I always forget to mute it when that goes off.
It's always like halfway through a meeting too. It's like fantastic, like just timing wise.
Mommy's not paying attention to us, so let's go make noise.
So it's their audio feeder. It's on a schedule. Anyway.
But yeah, it does feel like we're being spoken to. And I think that was a lot of the intention.
Yeah, it's almost like she like was like somebody sitting in one of her lectures and just like writing down every word she said.
I also think about, we talked about earlier, her going to like her editor's house and trying to explain this book that wasn't working but had a bunch of characters in it. And her editor telling her to write down what she had just said to him exactly as she said it. So I think that might just be her style. Like I said, I've never read anything else by Anne Lamott, so I don't have like this frame of reference for her writing. But it does feel like it does feel a little stream of consciousness. I feel like a lot of the suggestions that she's showing of like, just get it down and say what you need to say. And like she has a very much make sure you've said what you needed to say first and foremost over like form. Her style of writing is a lot more functional than I think aesthetic. Which is nice in a book like this, and I do think it's nice in like nonfiction and kind of memoir journalism kind of things. Um, Observational memoir, I guess, might be the term for it.
Yeah, it's a very uncomplicated read. Easy to go through. She doesn't use a lot of like metaphor or symbolism or flowery language. It's very straightforward.
Did you try to apply any of these methods, since you both do writing? So I'm curious if this is going to like work into your.
I did actually. Yeah, I started writing just random stuff instead of like feeling like I had to work on, a work in progress. So yeah, I just started writing small snippets of things.
Started going bird by bird, if you will.
Yes. So yeah, some of it, it's hard to build a habit with my schedule, but working on it. But yeah, the most interesting thing that came of listening to, because I didn't physically read this, but I found myself, as she was describing certain methodologies and things like that, thinking about my work in progress and like how I can progress certain things that I had previously been challenged with, about like characters, their motivations, like certain aspects of the setting and things that I was, not really, which I'm sure are going to be in my alpha reader's notes when I finally get around to reading that. Like things that weren't super fleshed out in this draft. And then I started like troubleshooting that as I was listening to her. So that was fun.
She also has an interesting concept in this that I'm trying to figure out if I agree with it or not. I think I'm on the fence a little bit about it. But she talks about her writing in first drafts and how a lot of it is her finding out what it's not. So it's not her finding out what it is. It's her working out that it's not this thing that she thought it was. And kind of just narrowing it down that way of like, well, it's not this, and it's not about this character. It's not about this. She's a little bit looser than I think I'd like to be. She definitely talks about like trying to write about school lunches and then discovering that it's actually about the kid outside by the leaning against the fence.
She definitely has a more loose method behind how she writes than I find that, especially for longer works, I need an outline to work off of. Like I need to know where I'm going. I can't just free write and then discover a story out of that. That's not how I operate.
Yeah, it's definitely a different version of writing than I'm used to, and I think different than most of the writing books that you will find.
I and I think I talked about this earlier. What I she affirmed a lot of stuff that I've learned from doing the writing myself and also from other writers. And one of the most important things this affirmed for me was don't be afraid to write shit that you're just going to throw away. I had a hard time writing when I was younger because I would have these ideas of where to go, and I would decide in my head that they weren't going to work instead of writing and working with the type on the page to actually see where they did go and if they didn't work. And I think one of the reasons my writing has made such progress over the last 8 years is I'm not afraid to chase, false shadows down blind alleys. I'll do it, and then I'll say, oh, okay, well, that doesn't work. So let me back up and let me go in a different direction. And I'm at a critical point in the novel that I'm working on right now, where I'm transitioning into the second act, and I'm having I've gone down a lot of blind alleys making that transition, and I'm finally starting to see how I need to make this work and what the characters need to do in order for me to get to that part. And I don't think I would have been able to get there if I hadn't sat down and written the stuff that I'm going to throw away.
Yeah, I've had that same struggle too, where like if I feel like it's not pushing the current work in progress in a meaningful way, I won't do it. So then I just find myself not writing at all because I sit and stare at a blank page instead of doing anything. So yeah, that's kind of my biggest takeaway from it too, and like why I've been working on just writing out little vignettes of random things rather than like trying to work on a project.
This isn't related to anything involving, because I think you both, I don't want to look at popular highlights. Sorry,
Aw.
when I click on it, we'll move on to that. I'll show you the popular highlights in a minute. How about that? There's a part of it that I really, really like that I don't think really applies to anything that I do, but I still really found it funny. She had this entire instructional part at the end that was all about how to write about other people without getting sued for like without slandering them, like in a way.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty funny. And weirdly enough, like the most instructional part of this entire thing, because like this book was entirely just like, take it slow, don't expect anything, like this isn't magic, it's a lot of hard work, you just kind of have to keep going with it and it will go where it needs to go. And also, here is a detailed list of how you talk about people without them suing you. And I think that's very funny. I just wanted to bring that up. I thought it was fun. But since I promised the popular highlights, these were the most popular highlighted things that Kindle users have highlighted from the Kindle books, because Amazon keeps track of that. I do like this quote about perfectionism. Perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor, the enemy of the people. It will keep you cramped and insane your whole life, and it is the main obstacle between you and a shitty first draft.
Well, this is something we've talked a lot about on Saturdays. This is a recurring theme in our Saturday conversations, this exact idea.
It's true. Let's see. One of the gifts of being a writer is that it gives you an excuse to do things, to go places and explore. Another is that writing motivates you to look closely at life as it lurches and by and tramps around. And I think this goes back to me saying that I really want to work on my journal writing. To be more observant in life and to be able to talk about it a little bit more in depth. Yeah, I think that's mostly what I got out of this book. There's little tidbits and like snippets of wisdom that I really, really like. Um, but really what I got was that I want to work on my like journaling.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be the way that her books come together, right? She kind of just, writes about her life and memories and things that are happening and then puts them into books.
And as much as I don't like reading that style, I'm always incredibly jealous of people that can do that. When I write my own observations, I don't care about other people's, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate her idea of the shitty first draft, and I think that can apply to, any artistic form that we do. Like, instead of focusing on the minute details, focus on getting the work done first. You can always refine it. But yeah, if you're thinking about writing a song, don't worry about it being perfect. Just, get it out, something down.
Yeah. I think that's what I found most annoying about this book is it keeps saying that, and that's a very important point and something that I need to constantly be reminded on, but it never quite gets past that point. So the harder part is opening up that draft again and reading it and actually going through and being like, oh, I don't need this piece, and bringing it together. And she does not spend a lot of time talking about that. I think for a lot of people, though, getting that first draft down, getting that shitty first draft is the hardest part because you're so focused on making it good in the end that you forget to do that first draft.
Right.
Not related directly to this book, but I was thinking about the discussion about journaling and trying to journal. And I suck at journal. I've tried to journal and for me, I have better things to do with my life. But I realized that I have a substitute for a journal, and that's doing my morning pages, the Julia Cameron thing, sitting down and vomiting 3 pages out first thing in the morning. And perhaps that can substitute or be your transition into journaling, Rebecca.
Oh, I do morning pages. I actually want my morning pages to be more journaling. I would rather switch them over. I don't like doing. I both like and hate morning pages.
The thing that made morning pages easier for me is that they can be anything, which means I can actually work on the book while I'm doing my morning pages, or I can just curse or make up silly stuff. I've written a lot of free-form poetry in my morning pages, very avant-garde stuff where I'm just playing with words. But that's the thing about the morning pages; they can be absolutely anything you want. So I find that if I can sit down and do them, I find that liberating. And I've solved some, some writing problems while doing them.
I still want at some point to like do an Artist's Way group, but that is a 3-month process. And even though the book clubs are 3 months, that means you have to start on day 1 of it being announced. And I don't want to put people through that.
And you have to make it consistent throughout through that whole quarter, right?
So it would almost be like a little separate group going through the Artist's Way. I stopped doing morning pages mostly because I found that about 2 of my 3 morning pages was just me complaining about the fact that I was doing morning pages. So, and it takes me like 45 minutes to an hour to get through them a lot of times. So I was just like, I don't have the time.
Are you handwriting them or are you typing them?
Handwriting.
Wow. I switched between the 2.
Yeah. But enough about this other thing. Did anyone have any parts of the book that they really wanted to talk about?
I know I dog-eared a few pages, so let me see if there's anything. This is,
Speaking of quotes that because like I said earlier, she has a lot of quotes from other writers in here that I tend to really, really like. I liked the quotes from other authors, which I think is really funny. Just, I read this book by Anne Lamott and I highlighted a lot of things that she quoted other people on. But I really like this one of John Gardner wrote that the writer is creating a dream into which he or she invites the reader, and that dream must be vivid and continuous. I tell my students to write this down, that the dream must be vivid and continuous because it is so crucial. Outside the classroom, you don't get to sit next to your readers and explain little things you left out or fill in details that would have made the action more interesting or believable. The material has got to work on its own, and the dream must be vivid and continuous.
That's a recurring theme throughout that book by Gardner.
Yes.
And probably, if anybody's looking for a book on craft, would be the first one that I would recommend you go to, because he dissects the writing process like nobody else.
And I'm a huge fan of his writing.
Yeah, he wrote. I mean, the one that I think everybody knows is probably Grendel.
Yeah.
Because and largely because of the opera that the woman who directed the Lion King stage play.
I do not know off the top of my head.
She directed. Let me hold on. Wrong movie. I can't believe this is where my my brain doesn't work anymore because I'm getting old. No,
it's okay. We can look it up later. But I am a huge fan of I think a lot of people have it in their head that they want to write a book, but they don't have the story fleshed out in their mind. And it's something that I do a lot in my photography work of, just sitting down and almost dreaming up this thing that I need to know in every single aspect of it, because I'm not going to be able to hit every aspect. But if I can hit a lot of them, then I have enough information that I can convey through the photo.
Yeah, I find her style and advice applies to other creative things I do as well, like drawing and things. I get frustrated when it doesn't come out the way I envisioned it. But I think more important is just getting something on paper, or in my case, tablet, and just, putting the idea together, whether or not it comes out exactly as you had envisioned. Yeah. Where'd Tim go?
I think I brought up Grendel, and now he cannot rest until.
I was actually going back to John Gardner. It was Julie Taymor who I was thinking of. She and her husband worked on, or her partner worked on an opera based on John Gardner's Grendel, which is why I think everyone knows that. Here's The Art of Fiction by John Gardner. This is it's probably the best book on the craft of writing that I've ever read. Just really good stuff.
What year was Bird by Bird published?
1994.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I find it very interesting because she does focus a bit here and there on certain processes for pursuing publishing and things like that. And it doesn't really apply anymore. So it's very dated information. So
a lot of the times when I found that she was talking about it was less that here's how you get published and more do not expect this.
Yeah, but she did talk about certain things if you want an agent, reach out to whomever, but it's it doesn't really work that way anymore.
You'd be surprised how much of it's actually very similar. The forms are slightly different and it's a little bit more inundated, but you're still just sending a bunch of work out and getting nothing in return.
Yeah, but you're not sitting taking newspaper clippings.
No, you're taking internet clippings.
Yeah.
And going through internet databases. I feel like my brain did not know whether to say databases or databases there, and it came out with some weird amalgamation of the two of them. There was that. There's a few times that I was shocked by how long the time frames were, because I find that in today's thing, you're not given 2 years to write a book. You're given like 8 months. And when she was talking about like this book where the characters didn't work, it was like 4 years that she was working on it and going back and forth with a publisher. And I also think that is dated information, just because like she talks about all these writers who have been working on the same project for like 6 years. And that definitely does apply to like somebody who's writing their first novel. But when you have an agent and you have an advance, you're expected to finish it in such a short time frame nowadays that it feels very relaxed when she talks about writing, and in a way that I don't think that it necessarily is anymore. I have a friend that was published last year, and it got like a lot of great reviews and things along that line, and she has already had to finish and put her second novel out to the editor because she was expected to publish it within 9 months.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like the timelines have gotten a lot shorter on all fronts of all aspects of media, because this came up when we talked about Fleetwood Mac too, how they were able to just kind of sit around for a couple of years and make an album. Like, you can't do that anymore.
Well, yeah. you can't do it on the record label's time.
Yeah, right.
Well, the other thing is that a lot of the compression comes from the elimination of downtime, such as, I mean, back when I was a kid, writers, sent their drafts off in the mail through snail mail or through FedEx or whatever to their editor. And then there was the whole process of marking up the draft. And, as you're getting down to the finals, galleys, whole big packages of, one long sheet folded over with all the type sent to you for you to go over and do all that work, and all that. A lot of that stuff has just disappeared from the process now. So that accounts for some of the compression. I think there is a demand. I saw this in graphic design when I was working as a production artist, because I started working as a production artist right when they were transitioning from physical cut and paste over to using, computers. And so the studios decided, well, if it's so easy to do it, we can cut your deadlines in half. So there is that expectation now that you can deliver work faster because the creative process is faster now.
Well,
no, it's
technology makes producing faster. That doesn't mean the creative process is faster.
Exactly, but they don't get that.
Yeah.
We are coming up on an hour here, so I wanted to know if anybody had any final thoughts on Bird by Bird.
I do want to ask, isn't the tone, and we talked about the tone of it, and I think it feels it's more cautionary than anything else, in that she's like, don't expect, basically the theme seems to be, she never comes out and says it, but don't expect to be a published writer.
Yeah, and don't expect to make money.
Right.
I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that this was written in a way that it's for her writing students.
Yeah.
And if there's anybody that expects to get rich and famous off of a art form that has historically not made people rich and famous, it's writers.
At least not
and I would say that kind of advice is even more true now. Now it's harder than ever.
Yeah. So it does feel cautionary, but it also feels like, it feels like it's written for people that are expecting to read this book and have magic happen. And this entire book this isn't magic.
But I think she's at the same time, she's also seems to be saying that that's okay. You don't have to write for the purpose of being published.
Right.
Or even if you are published for the purpose of making money. Like I'm seeing so many listings out there looking for content writers at like 10 cents a page. It's like, like what?
Well, they're trying to make it so that they can just use AI. See, no one wants to work.
When I first started writing, I was writing a lot of science fiction, and the science fiction magazines were paying a penny a word or 2 pennies a word.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing now.
And for better writers, many writers were getting 5 to 10 cents a word. You know, this is back in the 70s.
Wow. Yeah, they don't pay those kind of rates anymore.
Penny a page. Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think I am going to end the call here, unless anybody has any final notes.
Yeah. So moral of the story is don't write.
Because we don't need any more competition.
Because there's no future in it.
I thought you were going to continue that with, you know, if you're trying to.
I was, but I thought that was sufficient.
Yeah.
That's one of the themes of all our creative conversation, isn't it? It's you know, do it because you love doing it, because it's the art, that you love the creative process. If you happen to make money out of it, that's the you know, the frosting on top of the cake.
Yeah.
But don't do the art for the money. Do the art because you love what you're doing.
Well, and hopefully with that money will come. Like if you're doing what you love and you're putting it out there and you're being, you know, authentic in it, hopefully that will help, you know, spur the type of artistic career that you want. But that's not what Anne Lamott said.
She's hinting at it without saying it. Because nobody would buy the book if she came out right and said it.
Well, and I think there is something like not everyone is going to be successful. It is, you know, a sad fact, which is part of why I started the Dragonfly group is I want artists to be successful. I don't want people to be, you know, steering away from their art just because they can't make a living at it. Like the question is, how do we create that world?
By enjoying it and working on it bird by bird.
Exactly.
All right. I'm going to end the stream there, but thank you guys for joining me, and I hope to catch you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.